A luxury car can now leave the factory with equipment you have physically purchased, but capability you have not necessarily purchased.
Right, and that is a primary data point. It is establishing a core structural shift in automotive manufacturing.
And it is hiding plain sight on the assembly line.
Mm.
The processor is already present in the vehicle. The high-resolution cameras may already be installed in the chassis.
The cellular connectivity modules are integrated.
Yes, the motors, the advanced radar sensors, the lighting hardware, or the thermal comfort equipment, they may already be physically wired into the seats and the dashboard.
So what changes months or years later is simply permission. That distinction sounds purely technical on the surface.
But economically, it fundamentally alters the entire automotive business model. For those of you managing capital, observing tech supply chains, or analyzing consumer hardware, our objective today is to systematically evaluate the proprietary data and institutional notes surrounding this shift.
We are looking directly at the friction between heavy industrial manufacturing and software as a service economics. The economic divide here is absolute.
I mean, for the vast majority of automotive history, the manufacturer had one dominant opportunity to monetize the customer.
And that was in the moment the vehicle was sold. There were surrounding revenue pools, certainly, dealer financing, scheduled servicing, replacement parts, extended warranties.
Physical accessories, too. But the product itself was considered a finished industrial asset when it crossed to the dealership floor.
The transition to the software-defined model changes that premise entirely. The vehicle leaves production unfinished in a commercial sense.
A suspension feature can be activated long after delivery. An advanced driver assistance package can be added over the air. Motor performance can change.
The vehicle transforms into a persistent digital storefront years after the physical factory stopped building it.
We have already seen luxury manufacturers test different iterations of this monetization strategy, and the early results provide a crucial baseline metric for consumer rejection.
The most recognized case study remains BMW's heated seat subscription, but the market often misinterprets the data from that event.
The misinterpretation is significant. The problem with that specific experiment was not that drivers categorically rejected every conceivable form of automotive subscription.
No, the problem was much more specific to the physical asset. Many customers looked at the thermal hardware already installed in a $70,000 automobile they had just purchased.
And they asked a logical economic question. Why am I paying repeatedly to utilize a physical component already inside the product I own?
BMW stepped back from that particular approach. However, it is critical to note that the broader industry did not learn that customers unconditionally hate subscriptions.
Just look at the current market offerings. Audi has continued offering eligible post-purchase functions on demand.
Right, and Mercedes-Benz offers digital extras, which includes software-enabled performance upgrades on eligible electric vehicles.
Even BMW itself continues building vehicles fundamentally designed around post-sale software and function updates.
The lesson the industry extracted was much narrower. Customers draw a strict line between paying for a continuing service and paying for continuing permission.
Well, let us define that boundary. A subscription for live traffic routing makes intuitive sense to the market because the data has to remain current.
Cloud-based artificial intelligence involves ongoing computing costs that the manufacturer must absorb.
A continuous security service has to keep operating on external servers. A continuously improving automated driving system requires perpetual engineering development, safety validation, and network support.
Those are legitimate services, but consider the heating element embedded in the seat.
Right. No new physical input arrives from the supply chain next month. No technician is dispatched to install new hardware.
If you, the consumer, stop paying monthly fee, the feature disappears simply because the software issues a command to deny access.
Financially, to an automotive board looking for recurring revenue, that appears highly attractive. Psychologically, to the consumer, it is completely different.
The automaker has effectively turned traditional ownership into a conditional license.
This psychological friction over conditional licenses directly introduces the central economic tension of this entire transition.
Can luxury automakers create high-quality recurring revenue without damaging the premium relationship that originally justified the vehicle's high margin?
Luxury automotive economics desperately need recurring revenue for very understandable structural reasons. Building automobiles remains one of the most capital-intensive industries in the global economy.
The traditional economic burdens are massive. Before a single unit is produced, factories carry immense fixed costs. Model cycles require years of upfront engineering expenditure.
The transition to electric vehicles demands unprecedented investments in battery chemistry, power electronics, and new manufacturing infrastructure.
Working capital moves slowly through complex global suppliers and sits in physical inventory. Warranty obligations survive the initial sale and carry long-term liabilities.
Physical distribution networks are expensive to maintain. Consumer demand is inherently cyclical.
And interest rates heavily influence the affordability of monthly payments.
An automotive manufacturer can easily spend 5 years and billions of dollars developing a vehicle platform whose ultimate economics are still largely determined by the raw volume of physical units it manages to sell.
Software offers an entirely different financial proposition. The theoretical promise is that the company can sell the physical platform once and then sell additional capability repeatedly over the lifespan of that asset.
Institutional investors naturally pay close attention when a heavy industrial company begins discussing recurring revenue multiples.
I must push back on the margin illusion circulating in the markets right now.
The software balance sheet narrative.
Exactly. A recurring monthly payment from a consumer does not spontaneously transform a heavy industrial balance sheet into a pure software balance sheet.
The physical factory still exists and requires maintenance. The lithium-ion battery still degrades. The vehicle depreciates in the secondary market.
The internal processor becomes obsolete as computing standards advance. The local dealer still carries physical inventory that requires floor plan financing.
Meaning the credit lines they use just to keep those cars sitting on the asphalt.
The captive finance arm still carries the credit risk of the borrower. The manufacturer still has to provide physical parts and engineering support for a heavy machine that may remain active on the road for well over a decade.
Therefore, the correct metric for institutional investors to track is not simply asking how much gross subscription revenue the automaker can generate.
The critical metric is calculating the additional economic value generated after accounting for every physical, financial, and reputational cost required to support that digital layer.
To evaluate those costs properly, we must examine the hidden bill of materials. Let us consider the industrial logic of standardizing manufacturing.
Imagine two physical versions of the exact same premium vehicle on the assembly line.
Historically, a customer who orders a specific premium feature receives the required hardware for that feature. A customer who declines it receives a different, cheaper physical configuration.
In the software-defined model, the manufacturer may choose to install identical, highly capable hardware across a much larger percentage of the production run.
Installing common hardware across all vehicles reduces the number of unique wiring variants on the factory floor. It simplifies global procurement from suppliers.
It potentially eases inventory management because identical vehicles can be shipped to any market and configured later by the end consumer.
The industrial logic of this standardization is sound on paper, but we have to address the capital reality of those components.
The advanced hardware was paid for by the manufacturer long before the consumer was ever presented with a subscription option.
That introduces a severe financial trap regarding dormant hardware.
Management models often assume a scenario where a digital upgrade delivers a very high incremental gross margin once it is activated by the user.
That model fundamentally assumes the activation occurs. Now ask what physical components had to be installed on the assembly line to make that future activation technically possible.
Did the vehicle require extra compute modules, a higher resolution camera system, additional radar arrays?
A physical mechanical actuator.
Yeah.
A more capable power inverter to handle sudden torque increases.
And then calculate who financed that equipment before the customer subscribed.
If 100 vehicles rolling off the line carry an expensive, advanced component, but only 20 owners ever choose to activate and pay for it, the manufacturer is effectively carrying dormant capital in the other 80 vehicles.
If the cost of that dormant hardware is embedded in the base vehicle cost, the true economics of the subscription program start deep inside the manufacturing budget.
Not in the digital app store. The attach rate supersedes the headline subscription price in importance.
We also must account for the psychological complication regarding how those subscriptions are presented.
The promise of an inexpensive mass-market product often relies on modularity. You start with the bare essentials and pay more only if you require more capability.
Luxury historically makes a fundamentally different promise. The premium buyer pays for perceived completeness.
The flagship version of a product should inherently remove inconvenience. The ownership experience should actively reduce friction.
This dynamic is precisely why the subscription question is dangerous for premium automotive brands. A $20 recurring monthly charge may be financially trivial to an affluent buyer.
But wealth does not eliminate fairness sensitivity. Affluent customers can afford a fee and still deeply resent the transaction if they feel the brand is continually monetizing their presence.
That analysis must include the transaction fatigue the consumer faces. Wealth does not isolate the buyer from the reality of their monthly mobility stack.
Consider the individual line items. You have the primary vehicle payment or lease. You have automotive insurance, which is rising due to vehicle complexity.
You have ongoing fuel or electric charging costs. You have scheduled maintenance. You may be amortizing the cost of a home charger installation.
Once that physical baseline is established, add the digital layer. The customer is asked to pay for vehicle connectivity.
In-cabin entertainment packages, advanced driver assistance features, cloud computing capabilities for voice recognition, software-enabled performance packages.
Each individual subscription might look immaterial in isolation when presented in a corporate briefing, but the customer does not experience them in isolation.
They experience the aggregate total, that is subscription stacking.
The economic mistake automotive executives make is assuming every $5 or $10 charge operates independently. They compete for the exact same transaction tolerance.
Which forces us to consider the ultimate objective of the automaker. They do not merely want fragmented subscription revenue. They want lifetime customer value.
The ideal, frictionless sequence for the manufacturer operates like this. You lease the new vehicle, the brand's captive finance arm provides the lending.
You create a digital identity to access the vehicle. Over-the-air software updates keep the car technologically current.
You pay recurring fees for highly useful digital services. Routine maintenance is scheduled seamlessly through that exact same digital ecosystem.
Charging sessions are authenticated and billed through the integrated account. Crucially, a second vehicle is offered to your household before the first one is retired.
Finally, when that initial vehicle enters the used market 3 years later, the second owner is required to create a new digital account to operate the systems.
The vehicle becomes economically active for the manufacturer all over again.
The manufacturer has successfully turned one physical vehicle identification number into a multi-year sequence of recurring customer relationships. That sequence is infinitely more important to long-term enterprise value than the margin on one heated seat.
But that sequence only functions if lifetime value actually rises. Suppose the manufacturer successfully extracts an extra $1,000 of digital service revenue from a specific customer over a 3-year lease.
On a quarterly earnings call, that appears as a success.
Now suppose that same customer refuses to purchase their next vehicle from that brand because the entire ownership experience felt aggressively transactional.
That incremental $1,000 in digital revenue may have directly caused the destruction of a future $80,000 transaction.
The metric institutional investors must demand is total relationship economics. Extracting digital yield is a failure if it creates the vigilance and resentment that drives the customer to a competitor.
The contradiction becomes incredibly sharp here. A software-defined vehicle provides the manufacturer with continuous technical opportunities to monetize loyalty.
The brand can strengthen the relationship by delivering updates that genuinely make the vehicle better after purchase. Or it can train the customer to expect that every single improvement will carry another digital invoice.
One approach generates retention, the other generates fatigue.
The realization that permission is the most valuable, scarce asset forces an examination of how these subscription experiments actually hit the ledger. Let us transition from consumer psychology to the strict realities of the balance sheet. Automotive revenue has historically been massively front-loaded.
The manufacturer spends years deploying billions in capital before receiving a single dollar from the end consumer. They fund the factory tooling.
They prepare the assembly lines, they sign binding supplier contracts, they execute global testing. Finally, the vehicle is sold.
A massive share of the economic return on that invested capital depends entirely on that initial point of sale. Software fundamentally changes the timing of those cash flows.
The manufacturer can theoretically sacrifice some upfront certainty today in exchange for the possibility of recurring revenue tomorrow.
That shift creates an entirely new risk profile, requiring us to redefine the investor dashboard. Institutional investors must demand strict metrics and look past vanity metrics.
Do not accept the total number of connected vehicles as a metric of success. Connected does not equal paid.
Do not accept the number of vehicles technically eligible for an over-the-air upgrade. Eligible does not equal subscribed.
Do not accept the volume of free trials. The dashboard must track the exact number of eligible vehicles, the exact percentage that activate a paid feature.
The retention rate after the trial period expires, the recurring frequency of that transaction.
And critically, the ongoing maintenance cost of the software against the capital cost of the dormant hardware installed in the non-paying fleet.
When analyzing those margins, we must categorize digital revenue into three distinct accounting realities. It is inaccurate to group all software revenue together.
Category 1 represents features where the major capital cost was already embedded in the physical card during manufacturing.
For instance, a suspension upgrade where the physical dampers were already paid for on the assembly line.
Category 2 encompasses digital services that carry continuous external operating costs, such as cloud hosting, cellular data connectivity, and third-party mapping licenses.
Category 3 involves software that requires continuous, dedicated engineering to remain commercially viable and safe, such as automated driving systems.
Each of these categories presents entirely different contribution margins to the enterprise. Investors must be extremely wary of the marginal cost trap within those categories.
Management teams will highlight that the marginal cost of sending an over-the-air activation command to a vehicle is effectively zero. That may be true.
But that does not mean the underlying capability was cheap to develop. If a vehicle offers a software-gated performance upgrade, the physical powertrain had to be engineered, stress-tested, and validated.
It has to operate safely at that higher thermal and kinetic threshold. The electric motors may have been oversized.
Millions of lines of code had to be written and tested. Strict regulatory compliance work had to be completed.
The long-term warranty reserve assumptions had to be adjusted to account for the higher stress on the components.
The digital activation itself is nearly free. The latent capability required to enable that activation was a massive drain on capital expenditure.
This directly impacts residual values, which introduces severe leasing risk. Luxury automotive economics rely heavily on residual values to subsidize monthly lease payments.
When you lease a premium vehicle, your monthly payment is largely determined by the difference between the vehicle's capitalized cost today and its projected residual value at the end of the term.
If the expected residual value is high, the depreciation burden on you is lower, making the lease more attractive.
Introduce a software entitlement to that precise calculation. Consider the pricing dilemma.
Suppose a vehicle leaves the factory with a permanent performance entitlement tied directly to the physical vehicle identification number.
When that car enters the secondary market, the second owner receives that capability. That physical capability contributes to the vehicle's used market desirability and bolsters the residual value.
But suppose the manufacturer structures the entitlement differently. The hardware remains physically present in the vehicle, but the performance entitlement is tied exclusively to the first owner's digital account.
When the lease ends, the capability is digitally stripped from the vehicle. The second owner must pay the manufacturer again to access the exact same hardware.
Look at the risk transfer of that scenario. That pricing structure transfers a digital monetization experiment directly into the securitized auto financing system.
The original buyer may refuse to pay a premium because they realize the software option will add zero equity to their trade-in value.
The wholesale auction market, which moves thousands of vehicles daily, struggles to value the physical hardware versus the required digital entitlement.
Asset-backed investors who purchase tranches of securitized auto leases must suddenly account for digital feature volatility in their collateral pools. The manufacturer has effectively clouded the physical value of the asset.
Automakers have structural options for how they handle entitlements on the used market. They can make the feature permanent to the VIN, which protects resale value but sacrifices future recurring revenue.
They can make it entirely account-based, which maximizes recurring revenue but damages inherent vehicle value. They can offer a hybrid model.
But the fourth option is the most strategic, bundling the entitlement into the certified pre-owned program.
Imagine a 3-year-old premium model arriving at a dealership. Instead of the manufacturer treating the software as a capability that the previous owner took away, the manufacturer authorizes the dealer to reactivate selected premium services.
For 6 months, at no cost to the second buyer. This drives immediate digital authentication, forces the new owner to create a profile, and creates a fully configured high-value experience that supports the resale price of the physical asset.
That strategy introduces severe channel conflict with the dealer network. Dealers finance the floor plan inventory.
They handle the complex logistics of physical delivery. They execute the mechanical repairs.
If the manufacturer attempts to capture all downstream software revenue directly through an app, completely bypassing the dealer, capital tensions inevitably arise.
The dealer is paying interest on the physical inventory sitting on their lot, while the manufacturer attempts to extract the high-margin digital revenue directly from the cabin.
From a corporate strategy perspective, direct billing looks highly efficient. From a dealer's perspective, the manufacturer is actively stripping away downstream economics while forcing the dealer to carry the physical distribution burden.
We must also overlay the macroeconomic pressures on this entire model, specifically the impact of interest rates.
Higher borrowing costs mechanically shrink the discretionary monthly mobility budget.
When interest rates are low and used car trade-in values are historically high, a consumer might easily absorb a $40 monthly software subscription.
When automotive loan rates climb and vehicle affordability deteriorates, that exact same discretionary subscription becomes intensely exposed to cancellation.
That cyclicality distinguishes automotive subscriptions from enterprise software. Analysts often conflate the two, which is a structural error.
Enterprise software subscriptions are highly resilient because they are embedded in mission-critical corporate operations. A consumer automotive subscription is highly cyclical because consumers have natural built-in exit points.
A 36-month lease ends. A consumer decides to trade in the vehicle. A household decides to hold on to their older car during a recession rather than upgrading.
These natural exit points keep consumer switching costs significantly lower than software bulls assume.
Establishing that digital revenue must survive strict financial scrutiny reveals that the entire physical architecture of the car must change to support this business model. We must move the focus to engineering and supply chains.
We must systematically evaluate the narrative that a software-defined vehicle is simply a smartphone on wheels.
That analogy is convenient for investor presentations, but it is fundamentally flawed. A smartphone sits in a pocket. A car is a heavy, kinetic industrial machine that operates in severe physical environments.
It endures extreme thermal cycling, from freezing winter temperatures to intense summer heat. It endures constant physical vibration, moisture, and potential kinetic impacts.
Furthermore, the software in a vehicle is directly tied to life-critical kinetic systems. The code controls the braking actuators, the propulsion inverters, the steering assist motors, and the battery thermal management systems.
The engineering environment is hostile. To manage this, the industry is executing a massive shift towards centralized compute architecture.
Look at the specific data points from the engineering sector. BMW's new class architecture utilizes 4 centralized, high-performance domain computers to manage infotainment, automated driving, driving dynamics, and comfort functions.
They calculate this offers 20 times the processing capability of their previous distributed architecture.
Similarly, Audi's E3 1.2 architecture relies on 5 high-performance computers coordinating major vehicle domains. They are moving away from dozens of fragmented electronic control units towards centralized intelligence.
That reduction in wiring complexity comes at a severe cost: massive failure concentration.
In a legacy architecture, if a single peripheral control unit fails, you might lose a specific comfort feature, but the vehicle largely continues to operate.
When you centralize compute into 4 or 5 high-performance nodes, you shift the bottleneck entirely to advanced semiconductors and systems integration.
If a domain controller experiences a fault, the blast radius of that failure is substantially larger.
This forces the manufacturer to take on a massive software validation burden. They are no longer just assembling metal. They are managing complex computing ecosystems where cybersecurity becomes a systemic, life-critical requirement.
This introduces severe compute and energy trade-offs. The manufacturer faces the immense difficulty of estimating semiconductor workloads for artificial intelligence systems years before the actual software is written.
The vehicle has a lifespan of 10 to 15 years. The semiconductor replacement cycle is measured in months.
The manufacturer must forecast how much processing headroom the vehicle will need in the year 2035 and physically install it today.
That choice dictates the local versus cloud compute dilemma.
If the manufacturer relies on local compute, they must install heavy, expensive silicon upfront, drastically inflating the initial bill of materials cost.
If they offload processing to cloud compute, they lower the upfront factory cost but create massive ongoing operating expenses. They must pay for continuous cellular data transport and a remote server inference.
This may necessitate forcing the consumer into a subscription simply for the manufacturer to break even on the operating costs of a feature the consumer thought they already bought.
Furthermore, we must account for the electric vehicle energy drain. Every single auxiliary compute load, every continuously active exterior camera, every radar pulling the environment competes directly for electrons with the drivetrain.
Advanced software capability physically degrades the kinetic range of the battery, unless offset by extreme efficiency and power management.
These embedded hardware requirements create significant insurance externalities. We classify this as the sensor problem.
Recall the dormant hardware we evaluated earlier. To support future over-the-air subscription features, the manufacturer installs advanced cameras and radar arrays in the physical bumpers and side mirrors of the vehicle on the assembly line.
The owner may never actually subscribe to the automated driving feature. However, that hardware physically sits in the impact zone, fully vulnerable to damage in a minor collision.
Trace the transmission mechanism of that cost directly to the consumer. A minor parking lot impact occurs. The physical bumper is damaged.
The repair requires replacing a high-definition camera and an advanced radar unit that the owner never even used.
That complex hardware requires expensive, time-consuming digital calibration by a specialized technician to ensure the entire domain controller continues to function properly.
The repair bill escalates by thousands of dollars. The insurance provider must pay to restore the physical asset to its factory state, regardless of the active subscription tier.
Insurers aggressively price this exact risk into their actuarial models and raise premiums across the board.
This creates a physical externality where the consumer is forced to pay higher monthly insurance premiums simply to subsidize the automaker's dormant digital business model.
Beyond physical damage, the manufacturer is assuming a massive long-tail liability. There is a fundamental timeline mismatch.
A premium vehicle operates on the road for 15 years. A consumer technology company often drops software support for a phone after 5 to 7 years.
Automakers are inheriting support horizons that the technology sector actively avoids. Over 15 years, cellular networking standards will change from 4G to 5G to 6G.
Third-party software libraries will be deprecated. Cloud infrastructure API endpoints will be retired.
This defines the concept of digital obsolescence preceding mechanical obsolescence. Fast forward 12 years.
The electric motor functions perfectly. The suspension is intact, the chassis is sound, but the digital authentication server required to operate the dashboard has been retired by a third-party vendor.
The vehicle's mechanically viable, but economically and operationally stranded.
This stranded digital layer introduces extreme negative operating leverage. To keep the fleet running, automakers will be forced to maintain parallel engineering teams to support multiple outdated legacy hardware generations simultaneously.
Draining the very software margins they sought to capture? All of this software control is bound by cybersecurity as a hard boundary.
Feature activation is not governed by casual App Store rules. It is governed by international vehicle regulation.
We must consider UN R155, which strictly regulates cybersecurity management systems, and UN R156, which strictly regulates software update management systems.
Every single remote configuration, every over-the-air update that alters the code of a 2-ton machine must be rigorously validated, encrypted, and authorized through compliance systems that trace directly back to the manufacturer's legal liability.
Operating a secure, long-term software platform over a physical asset inherently requires vast amounts of continuous telemetry and user interaction,
which triggers the ultimate strategic battle over data ownership and regulatory limits.
Once a vehicle is permanently connected to a network, the concept of ownership fractures into distinct, often competing layers.
You have the traditional ownership of the physical chassis and battery, but you also have the manufacturer's control of the software environment.
You have the intellectual property licensing of the code, you have contractual digital rights, you have complex data rights.
And you have the customer's digital identity locked inside the corporate ecosystem. Those layers belong to different entities.
Data rights and privacy are the immediate battlefield. We must evaluate the European Data Act.
This legislation fundamentally alters the balance of power by granting users the explicit right to access data generated by connected products, including connected cars.
And crucially, the right to share that data with third parties. This means the customer can mandate that their vehicle's diagnostic telemetry be streamed directly to an independent repair facility or a third-party insurance provider.
This severely constrains the automaker's strategic ability to monopolize the lucrative aftermarket by locking data inside their proprietary servers.
In the United States, privacy enforcement acts as a parallel constraint. Consider the Federal Trade Commission enforcement case against General Motors and OnStar.
The core of that action involved the collection and subsequent disclosure of precise consumer geolocation and driving behavior data without adequate informed consent.
That regulatory action is a definitive warning. It frames privacy not just as a compliance checklist, but as a core premium value.
For a luxury brand, convenience is the objective. But convenience easily flips into surveillance the moment the consumer realizes their telemetry is being monetized by a third-party data broker.
A premium brand cannot survive if the cabin feels like a surveillance tool. This tension extends directly to the right to repair boundary.
There is an ongoing debate between manufacturers and independent repair networks.
Manufacturers argue, pointing directly to UN R155 and cryptographic safety requirements, that they must lock diagnostic access to protect system integrity and prevent malicious hacking.
Independent repairers argue that manufacturers are weaponizing safety regulations to create an anti-competitive monopoly over post-sale maintenance.
The boundary defined by regulators in this dispute will dictate the entire economic structure of the automotive aftermarket for the next decade.
You must overlay global competition on that regulatory map. Competition ruthlessly destroys pricing power for software gates.
Assume brand A successfully launches a high-margin subscription for an automated highway driving feature.
Brand B, a rival automaker desperate to gain physical market share, simply bundles that exact same software capability as standard equipment in their base model.
The software gate collapses. The high-margin subscription evaporates. The customer simply leases the competitor's vehicle.
Furthermore, we must contrast pure software gating with true asset-as-a-service models. Look at NIO's battery as a service architecture.
This is fundamentally different from charging $20 a month for a dormant heating element. NIO's model shifts capital intensity.
The consumer buys the car but subscribes to the physical battery through a swapping network.
It lowers the upfront purchase price of the vehicle, completely removes the chemical degradation risk from the consumer's balance sheet, and provides highly visible physical infrastructure value.
The consumer is paying for a tangible industrial service rather than simply renting permission to use a dormant component.
Because of these varying models, we must separate automotive subscriptions into 6 distinct economic signatures. Lumping everything together as software revenue is analytically useless for an institutional investor.
Category 1 is connectivity and information services. Category 2 is software-enabled vehicle capability.
Category 3 is cloud or AI compute services. Category 4 is physical asset access, such as battery swapping.
Category 5 involves ownership services like concierge maintenance. Category 6 covers mobility usage, such as fractional access.
And we must anticipate a 7th category for autonomous domains, where capability is priced by time or operating area.
You map the unique risk profile to each signature. Category 1 carries continuous network bandwidth costs.
Category 2 carries massive upfront bill of materials exposure for dormant hardware. Category 3 carries variable cloud compute and API costs.
Category 4 carries immense physical capital intensity and depreciation. Category 5 carries human labor and parts inflation risk.
Category 6 carries fleet utilization and residual value risk. They are entirely different businesses hiding under the same subscription umbrella.
And these models face severe geographic fragmentation. Here is the ultimate manufacturing paradox of the software-defined vehicle.
Automakers standardize physical hardware globally to lower factory costs. They build the exact same chassis for global distribution.
But differing regional privacy laws, right to repair mandates, and dealer franchise regulations force the manufacturer to recreate that exact same complexity in software and legal compliance.
They save money on physical wiring harnesses, but spend it on localized software governance. With the regulatory, structural, and competitive limits clearly defined, we must model exactly what strategies will survive these immense pressures over the next decade.
Let us model the scenarios, starting with the sustainable outcome. Disciplined adoption.
In this scenario, automakers accept the limits of consumer tolerance. Core physical functions, like suspension, seating, basic engine performance, are sold transparently with the vehicle. The hardware is unlocked.
Subscriptions are strictly and exclusively limited to features that provide genuine, continuous external value. Live navigation data, cloud-based artificial intelligence, active security monitoring.
The consumer clearly understands that the recurring payment funds an ongoing external service, not a dormant internal switch.
The aggressive bull case models a future dominated by deep AI integration.
In this scenario, the vehicle develops a persistent digital assistant that manages energy consumption predicts maintenance failures, and optimizes route planning based on proprietary, deeply integrated vehicle telemetry.
This creates a functional moat that generic consumer technology companies cannot easily replicate, because the automaker's AI has exclusive access to the kinetic and thermal data of the machine itself.
However, we must heavily weight the bear cases. The first bear case is a pure financial disaster scenario.
The manufacturer commits the factory capex to install heavy dormant hardware across the entire fleet. They incur massive software development costs.
But the consumer conversion rate is abysmal. The company is left paying for both the dormant silicon and the cloud infrastructure without the necessary recurring revenue to achieve a return on invested capital.
The second bear case is more insidious: the invisible franchise loss.
In this scenario, short-term digital revenue rises. The quarterly earnings look strong, but brand equity silently and severely erodes.
Consumers feel constantly monetized. This erosion doesn't show up in the software revenue line. It shows up years later in massive customer acquisition costs.
Collapsing loyalty rates and plummeting residual values on the secondary market.
To avoid those bear cases, structural winners must execute on specific capabilities.
We define 5 absolute requirements. 1. A robust, unified technical platform. 2. Disciplined capital allocation between physical hardware and software development.
3. Clear, undeniable consumer value in the digital offering. 4. Committed, long-term support horizons to prevent digital obsolescence.
5. Deep consumer trust regarding privacy and safety.
I will add the crucial 6th capability, which is perhaps the hardest for an industrial executive to accept: commercial restraint.
The discipline to leave money on the table. A luxury brand must protect scarcity, desirability, and the frictionless nature of the experience.
Monetizing every possible microtransaction destroys the premium proposition. We must also briefly note the dynamic bargaining occurring in the supply chain.
Automakers are currently fighting Tier 1 suppliers, semiconductor designers, and tech giants over who actually controls the telemetry and the premium customer interface.
The automaker owns the metal, but the tech supplier may ultimately capture the high-margin data.
Which brings us to the final investor dashboard. The definitive metrics to track are not headline revenue numbers.
Track the eligible installed base. Track the paid conversion margin. Track the ongoing warranty costs associated with complex domain controllers.
Track the specific used car performance of software-heavy models. Track the duration of the support horizon.
The ultimate capital question that decides the viability of this entire transition is this: does the incremental cash generated by software over the lifespan of the vehicle mathematically exceed the incremental capital expenditure and continuous operating burden required to generate it?
If the answer is no, the automaker has simply undertaken a massive, complex engineering exercise to destroy shareholder value.
That draws the final, vital distinction between lock-in and loyalty. Software undoubtedly allows the automaker to remain economically present in the driver's life every single day.
But lock-in, making it technically or financially expensive for the consumer to leave the ecosystem, is not loyalty.
Loyalty means the customer actively does not want to leave. The only sustainable model for the software-defined automotive future is clear: own the machine, subscribe to the continuing value.
If this analysis changed how you think about automotive subscriptions, subscribe to the Unlayered Global. We follow the money, technology, companies, and hidden cost structures that determine who actually captures value after the headline disappears. If your next luxury car becomes better every year, would you pay for that improvement, or should the price of luxury mean the car was already yours in full?